Hi, my name is Rick Malava, and my nickname in the forums is CTBRAM. One of the users in the forums, SIFIDIS, asked a question about how you could apply different shaders to this NURB surface, and Next Design responded that there are a number of different ways that you can do this, and probably the simplest would be to just create a material, apply a ramp shader, and then just apply the ramp shader to this guy as it is right now. Or you could take this into the UV editor. NURBS objects automatically have their UVs created for you, and you could just paint a texture onto the surface. You don't have as much control as you do with polygons, but that's another approach that you could take to solve the problem. However, if you do want to take the approach of splitting this into two separate surfaces and applying a material to each surface, then you simply collect, as you've already figured out, you simply select an isoparm and then detach that isoparm to create two surfaces and then apply a material to each surface. But the next problem you run into is when you render, you get this this faceting that you're seeing here. Now, this isn't a NURBS only issue. This happens for both NURBS and polygons, and the reason that you're seeing the faceting here has to do with how many times this model is subdivided at render time. By default, both for NURBS and for polygons, Maya subdivides your model 2 times. So in the case of a NURB sphere, you start out with 8 sections and 4 spans, which is 32 faces. The top and bottom 16 are triangles, and the middle 16 are quads. It subdivides those each 2 times. So for the case of the quads, each face becomes 4 faces, and then each of those 4 faces become 4 faces. So if you have a total of 32 faces, assuming that they're all quads, you'll subdivide the first time and you'll get 4 times 32 is 128, and you subdivide the second time and you get 4 times 128, which is 512. And at that point, that's what this thing is tessellated at, and then it creates takes that 512 polygons and it further splits them up into all triangles. So in the end, Maya renders just triangles, regardless of what render engine you use. So in other words, to fix this faceting, we've got to subdivide this model more times. Now you can do that a couple of ways. You can either create the initial NURB sphere, or in the case of a polygon, your initial polygon sphere with more spans and sections, so that when it subdivides twice, this distance here, which is the length of one of the triangles in this model when it's tessellated, will be smaller than this. And so if you have smaller triangles, you get less a shorter distance between these facet points, and depending on how far your camera is away, you'll get less faceting. Okay, now the disadvantage of doing that is that you're going to, regardless of your camera distance, you're going to always subdivide 2 times. You're going to create more polygons, and more polygons will take longer to render. So what we ideally would want is a way of adjusting the render tessellation dynamically based on the distance the camera is from the model. Now, how you fix this tessellation is dependent on the renderer you use. If you're using the Maya software renderer, there's no way that I know of to dynamically change tessellation at render time. You have to go in and physically determine how close your camera is going to get, figure out how you want to tessellate the model for that distance, and then regardless of camera distance, that's how the model is going to get tessellated. So if the part is far away, you're going to have to render unnecessary polygons, which will increase your render time. And this is why I prefer to use the mental ray renderer for both polygons and NURBS in Maya, because I can create something called an approximation node, which will dynamically change the tessellation level of my model based on the distance the camera is from it. So let's take a look at that. So if I come over into Maya here and I create a polygon sphere, not a polygon sphere, let's create a NURBS sphere. Create a NURBS sphere. The first thing you'll notice is the default sphere is 8 sections and 4 spans. So once again, 32 faces. Now the default subdivision for Maya is it's going to subdivide the surface 2 times. So each of these 4 faces, this face will be split into 4, and then each of these 4 faces will be split into 4 again. So each face basically gets subdivided 16 times. Once it's reached that level, it's then further subdivided into triangles, and that's what gets rendered. So let's split this into two surfaces so we're on the same page. So I'm going to pick this isoparm, and then I'm going to go to Edit Nurbs, and I'm going to detach the surfaces. So now I have two separate surfaces, and I've already created some Lamberts here. So I'm going to take this guy, and I'm going to assign the red to it and assign the white to the bottom part, right? And so now, with all the default settings, when I render this, you'll see it's rendering off screen, but it only takes a couple seconds to render here, so I'll just drag it over when it's done. Okay, so you can see we're getting that problem, especially over here. It's very pronounced. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but it's also faceted around this outer edge too. I'm also a little farther away than he was in his camera shot with a different camera resolution. I'm using high definition 720. So if I render this again with the camera up a lot closer, and it's still hard to see the faceting on the outside, but you can definitely see it on these inner surfaces here, right? And so the first thing is, let's look at why we're seeing the faceting. So an easy way to understand that is just to select a surface, come over here to its attributes, and then go to this will be scrolled up here. Scroll down the Tessellation tab, and then click on Display Render Tessellation. So this is how this model is being split up. It's first, once again, subdivided 2 times, and then it's split up into triangles, or it's triangulated at the end. So you can see, everything ends up being polygon triangles. And you can see that for the case of this triangle, this length is the smallest that it was able to triangulate this face down to by the time it got to this point, right? So that's why you're seeing the faceting. You're seeing this edge from here to here. So if I could subdivide this twice as many times, I could get closer without seeing faceting. And if in the case of using the Maya software renderer, you can do that by going into the Tessellation tab, and you see here simple tessellation options, and you can have all these options: highest quality, high quality, medium quality is the default. So if I kick this to high quality, you see it subdivides the model. It subdivides it more times. The problem with this method, though, is that now, regardless if the camera's here or if the camera's there, that's how many times it's going to subdivide the model, and so it's going to take longer to render when you use this method. And this is the disadvantage to software, to Maya software in general. The other disadvantage to Maya software is you have to go through each piece independently, and you can see this is they've got different render tessellation. So you got to go through each piece and change its render tessellation, either by checking this quality, and this is the other disadvantage. I have this quality, this curvature tolerance. I can come in here and I can select the U division factor or the V division factor. Let me set those back to the default. Right, and then there's even more. I can come down here to advanced options, and I can select smooth edge, which now tries to create more triangles at the border edges to try to reduce faceting on the border edges without creating too many polygons on the inner surfaces. So there's another method. And then you've got edge swap, which will try to flip edges. And then if that's not enough for you, come down here, and there's even more options under advanced tessellation. You can turn these options on in here. And to show you how complex that can get with Windows, with Maya software rendering, if I go to Windows General Editors and bring up the attribute spreadsheet with both of these surfaces selected, and I select the Tessellation tab, you can select a lot of the attributes for any object within Maya by selecting this attribute spreadsheet and selecting all the objects that you want to adjust the attributes on it. It can be both NURBS or polygon surfaces or sub-D surfaces. In this case, we're interested in tessellation, and these are all the options that you can control tessellation with. So first of all, you have to understand what each of these do, and you have to try to set the best setting for each surface in your model. And once it's set, it doesn't matter what the camera distance is, it's always going to tessellate it at that level, which can be wasteful if your part's way out here, like this. So the reason I like to use the mental ray editor is I have a method where I can adjust this tessellation at render time based on camera distance. And the way that you do that is you open up something called the approximation editor. First of all, you have to make sure that you're using mental ray as your renderer. Go to render globals and make sure you're using mental ray. Set up all the settings that you normally set up in the globals, and then come up here to Windows, Rendering Editors, Mental Ray, and pick Approximation Editor. Now with this surface selected, I already had done one of these, so I'm going to delete the node. With this surface selected, now this approximation editor works for displacement. It also works for subdivisions on polygons and sub-Ds, and it works for subdivision on NURBS surfaces and NURBS curve. And so in our case, we're interested in NURBS surfaces, and by default with this surface selected, it says derived from Maya, which is just going to do the default tessellation that you see right here. I want to create a special node that will adjust this tessellation based on camera distance. So to do that, with this face selected, I'm going to hit Create. And now it creates a mental ray subdivision surface approximation node. And if I come over here and I select this surface and I hit Edit to bring that approximation node back up into my attribute editor, you have several different approximation methods that you can use. Now I'm not going to go through all of these because I don't want to turn this into a 3-hour video. All of these have cases where they have advantages and disadvantages, but if you want the one method that works in almost every case, pick spatial. Now the way spatial works is it uses this length value in conjunction with this minimum and maximum subdivision level to determine how many times it will subdivide this mesh until it reaches a maximum triangle length of whatever you set down here. Now with the length set to 0, in this mode it's just going to use the default tessellation. Now I have my grid in view here, and you can see that each of these darker squares is 1 unit, and you can see that that's pretty close to what this is. So this is approximately 1 unit right now. So if I came in here and I cut this in half, it says set it to 0.5, right? And just with the camera right here, which is pretty close to the same distance it was for this, I'll render again. Right. Now remember, I've only applied the approximation node to this red surface, so we're still getting tessellation on the white one. So let me do this. If I pick the white surface, and this is the other beauty of the approximation node. Once I've created one, I can pick a surface, and you can see right now this surface is derived from Maya, which is going to use the default tessellation. I can come down here and I can pick this approximation node, and I can say assign. And so now when I pick each of these surfaces, it's going to use the settings for this approximation node. The beauty of this is you can create an approximation node with different levels of tessellation quality based on different parts of your model. For small parts, you don't need to have as high a fidelity as you do for more prominent parts. And so you can create a node for each of those, and then you can grab whole groups of components in your model and apply a single approximation node to it, and you're done. You don't have to sit there and try to figure out all those different software settings that you had with the Maya software editor. So now both of these have got that. Now the default tessellation display doesn't change, so it's going to be tessellated more, but you're still seeing the default tessellation. I'm going to turn that off because it's distracting. So here we go. So now, actually, I'm going to keep it on this one just because it's easier to describe what's going on. So I've changed it to 5 on both of these. Right now, they both have the mental ray approximation editor. You see when I check each surface, they have that. And so now when I render this, sorry, it's lagging. Okay, now when I render this, now that they both have the same approximation node on it, you won't see the fringe effect we were getting. Right now it's smoother, but I can still see there's faceting here. But what it's done is it's taken that approximately 1 unit minimum triangle length, and it's cut it in half. So I'm seeing I'm still seeing facets, but they're getting smaller. And so what I can do is I can come in here, pick this surface now, so that I get into the approximation editor, and I see it here, and I can hit edit again. And let's set this to a smaller number, 0.25. And I'll bring this back over, and I'll render it again. And now what it's going to do is it's going to keep subdividing this model until each of those triangles either reaches 0.25 in length based on camera distance, or until I reach 5 levels of subdivision. Right? So now you see there's no faceting at all that you can see at this distance. And so to show how this subdivision level works in conjunction with length, I'm going to set this back to 0.5. And I'm going to set this maximum subdivision level down to 1. So now it's going to keep subdividing this mesh until the length gets to 0.5 or until the maximum number of subdivisions is 1. And obviously it's going to hit 1 subdivision level before it hits 0.5. So what we get is what we expect, 1 level of subdivision, right? So with the length still set to 5, let's bump this to 3 and render it again. Right? And from this distance we don't see any faceting. But if I zoom in a lot closer and I render again with 3 levels of subdivision and 0.5, you can see faceting again. I see a facet here, here, here. So now I'm seeing faceting again. So what I want to do is I want to reduce this number some more. So let's reduce it to 0.25. And let's render this again. Now you would expect that I'm going to get less faceting. But what you're going to see is that I don't. It's going to look exactly like the last one did. So I can already see a facet here and here. And you can see the facet here, 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 here. So even though I've reduced this length to 0.5, it hasn't reduced the size of the triangle edges when it subdivides this. And the reason for that is it's hit this maximum subdivision level. So it subdivides and then it checks to see what the maximum triangle length is. And if it's larger than this, it subdivides again. And it keeps doing that until it reaches this length or it reaches 3 subdivision levels. If I come in here and I increase this to 4, you'll see that will allow it to subdivide one more time. And now you won't see any, you shouldn't see any faceting at all at this distance, which says that this is pretty close. So at this distance, a length of 1/4 of a unit and 4 subdivision levels ensures that you're going to get no faceting. You see, no faceting on either side. The beauty of this is when I'm back here, whoops, helps to actually zoom out the model. When the model is back here, it's not going to subdivide this 4 times. It's going to subdivide it less. And so if I render this from back here, and we look at the render time, you'll see that it's 6 seconds, right? And it's, I guarantee it's not rendering 4 times because that length is based on units of pixels on the screen. So as this gets farther away, that each triangle gets smaller. So it has to subdivide it less times to reach this value right here. And so if I come over here and I zoom this guy in, right? Right, now it's going to have to subdivide more. So it took 6 seconds to render this. And when I get this close, it will take longer because it's going to be subdividing this model more. And I would probably guess twice as much, so it should be close to 12 seconds. There we go, 12 seconds. So there you go. We can optimize our render times, and we can dynamically control tessellation at render time using the mental ray approximation node. So once again, the way that you do that is you select your surface, you come down to nurbs tessellation and create a approximation node. You go into the attribute editor and select spatial, and then you can sort of make an intelligent guess on how small you want to set this length value based on if you know what 1 unit is in your grid. And you can see that the default tessellation, by turning on the default tessellation, this is what gives you a clue of where you're initially starting out, which is approximately 1 unit. So, you know, and then you just logically come in here and say, well, let's cut it to 0.5 and see if that fixes it, and leave your default maximum subdivision level up at where it starts out by default, which is 5, and see if that fixes the tessellation. If it does, but you're still getting tessellation, cut this value in half again. So we went to 0.25, right? And see if that fixes your tessellation. And once we hit 2.5, that was kind of the limit. It didn't get any better. Then the next thing to do is just figure out what your optimum maximum subdivision level is, and so crank it down to something fairly small, and then keep cranking it up until you don't see any change. It stops subdividing before it reaches this length, and then you know how to sort of match this subdivision length or the subdivision value along with this length value to optimize your settings. And then you just apply this approximation node to all of the NURBS pieces in your model, and it'll take care of render tessellation for all those pieces automatically based on camera distance, and you're all set. So that's a little bit about NURBS tessellation. You can also use this approximation editor for polygons and sub-Ds, which is very handy, and you almost have to use it for displacement maps. I find that mental rays displacement maps using the displacement approximation editor is much more reliable than using the Maya software renderer as well. So anyway, I'm up to 20 minutes. I'm sorry this got so long. I didn't expect it to get so rambly, but anyway, I hope this helps you understand how you can dynamically control tessellation using the mental ray approximation editor at render time. Thanks for listening, and I hope this helps you out.